Welcome back. You're with us here in India Today, and we are tracking for you the booster shot budget. What's going to be in store as we count down to Nirmala Sitharaman announcing Budget 22. Let's take a look at some of the key metrics that we're going to be watching out for as well, and some that have transpired. Let's take a look at those inflation numbers. It will be a key talking point as to how the Finance Minister has factored this in to the math this budget. We all know that CPI has been rising, and take a look at that screen in front of you as well. You'll get a sense of how we've been seeing that build up on inflation. And primarily, of course, we're also seeing edible oils. That's the major chunk of why we're seeing that spike coming in. So can it moderate? Can it be kept into control? What are some of the actions that can be taken? That will be a key talking point. 5.3 is what we're looking at right now. That's the key number to keep in mind when it comes to inflation figures. Another important metric will be, of course, spending on healthcare. Let's pull that up for you. Remember last year's budget, this was a very, very big part of the budget. Given that we're coming out of the third wave, they've already, of course, factored in quite a substantial sum of expenditure continuing on healthcare. But what will be the step now going forward? That's going to be the big question. Actual expenditure, just taking a look at that graph, has come down post the peak. What will be the continued outlay? What will this mean in terms of proportion of overall revenue that they're allocating towards healthcare expenditure? That will again be an important question that we'll wait to hear answered.
All right, let me go to Anant Narayan, who's been waiting by patiently. Anant, one of the key concerns is what is going to happen on the oil front, and that impacts our import bill and in turn the currency. What's the outlook for the currency according to you?
So that, look, there are some things we can control, some things we can't. Unfortunately, both inflation, particularly with relation to commodity prices, and things like edible oil prices, and things like global shortage of chips, etc. Frankly, there's not much that we can do in the short run to control these things, and we have to take what is dealt out to us. I guess the question really is, when it comes to inflation and imports, what is it that we can control within in our economy? Here is where the concern and the link to the budget is. While we exult about more government expenditure, and we want them to spend more on capital expenditure, for instance, or on healthcare and education, all good causes. The problem also is when the government spends and borrows money to spend, it creates money that in turn creates demand, and that in turn can create both imports as well as inflation. Unfortunately, as a country, we've not done very well in meeting the demand that's created by creation of money. Every time, for instance, see last year, from September onwards, our trade deficit has started to cross $20 billion per month on average. And a lot of it, by the way, is not just gold and petrol. It's also things like electronics. It's also chemicals. It's also plastics. It's also a whole bunch of manufactured products. So the moment we see some demand coming through, and in this case, from the top of the pyramid and the top of the K-shaped recovery, immediately translates into imports rather than from domestic production. So, two real things that we need to do. One is, of course, lay the ground for domestic production and employment to go up. Which is why it all boils down to what are you pushing into infrastructure and creating an enabling environment for MSMEs and manufacturing to pick up things like PLI, etc. I think that's very, very critical, because unless we create our own output to meet the demand created by fiscal spending or by monetary policy, etc., we will always be in this loop of inflation and current account deficits, etc. On the currency, Siddharth, look. At the moment, the balance is looking a little skewed. We are seeing very, very high trade deficits on a monthly basis. As I said, $20 billion per month. If you average that, that becomes $240 billion in a year. Services exports are looking very, very good. So even if we get $150 billion of net invisibles, we are still left with something like $90 billion of current account deficit. That's a 3% current account deficit. Again, we have plenty of reserves. RBI is sitting on $635 billion of reserves, so no problems on that front. They can manage currency markets, and I think they will manage currency markets in the short run. However, over a 3-4 year period, if we consistently continue to import every demand that comes up in the economy, this is not good news at all for us, neither from a jobs and output perspective, nor from an inflation perspective, nor from an external balance perspective. I think that's the real bottom line. whatever you do in the fiscal policy, yes, you have to spend money right now, but make sure it translates into jobs and output so that we don't get into this loop of inflation and trade deficits and current account deficits.
All right, several key points there. We have both Hiren and Punita also with us. Let me come to you, Punita, on this, because another criticism is that what we're seeing right now is really a K-shaped recovery or uneven recovery. There's been a lot of talk on what can be done for the unorganized sector, for MSMEs this time around. So while on one hand we have the government tom-tomming the amount of wealth generation that we've seen in this last year in the capital markets, on the other hand, the criticism is that it's not a broad-based recovery. What would you like to see in order to ensure that that the needle moves ahead now going forward?
Two important things that I think we need to focus on. The organized sector is obviously showing great resilience, and I'm on boards of lots of companies. But there too, we are seeing some headwinds. The headwinds are coming from wage pressures. So wages are going up. So to the extent that people have jobs, I think the wages are increasing, so they are able to manage in an inflationary environment. But the companies obviously are going to focus on margin pressures. We're also seeing raw material prices going up for companies. But still, nevertheless, the revenue growth has been strong. But going forward, I think while the revenue growth might be strong due to growth, I think margins could be under pressure. Now, on the unorganized sector, the MSME, there is still a lot of pain there. And a lot of that is because of COVID.
Punita, I'll have to cut in here because we are seeing visuals live that just played out. That was the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman entering North Block just before the cabinet meeting that will take place around 10:15 a.m. and then the budget presentation at 11. Abha, I want to quickly take a point with Mr. Subhash Garg. Mr. Garg, for the entire concerns that we are expressing, oil prices, food and fertilizer prices, overall inflation, but the bigger issue is private consumption. Private consumption still being lower than pre-pandemic, and private consumption, as you know, makes up almost 55% of our GDP. Can there be anything that you expect to give a boost to private consumption?
See, the private consumption by the government is basically in the form of either transferring some cash or the support in the form of kind, or give some employment income in the form of the NREGA, etc. There is no other direct measure which the government undertakes in the budget. The policy sides are different. So in this, the NREGA continues to be attracting a lot of demand. This year also, it's under budgeted in my judgment. So you would see increase in the NREGA, and next year also, assuming that the same kind of situation would continue, because there is a very large section of workers who are either not getting employment or are facing the wage loss situation. In the organized sector, there is a good increase in wage and there is wages pressure. But in the unorganized, which is roughly about 70-75% of the employment market. So I think government can continue to provide budget for the NREGA. The demand side is being met basically by sort of providing the food cheap or the free of cost. There would be a major decision to be taken because this food subsidy, the free food scheme runs out on the 31st of March. But what do you do next year? Should you continue with it or not? You have another problem because you're sitting on, you buy about 100 million tons of food grains, but your food security schemes takes about 50-55 million tons. So you can't leave it with the FCI and incur cost of carriage only. So I think...
Let me bring Hiren in as well. Hiren, private consumption, want to see a boost on ground, jobs, consumption. These will be, some of the key themes. And in terms of really what tools the finance minister has, what do you feel it's more realistic to expect? Where do you feel the priorities will lie among some of the sectors that are likely to benefit from Budget 2022?
Yeah, so I think there is definitely a need to boost consumption at the bottom of the pyramid. One way to do it is to increase the allocation to Narega, because there was a lot of job losses in the unorganized segment, also in many of the service sectors, and we have yet to see full resumption of employment opportunities there. So I think maybe if you remember many years back, there was a concept of an investment allowance reserve, right? Which means that if companies did capex, they got a tax break. I think some kind of employment allowance reserve could be very interesting, which encourages companies to hire people, and if they hire more people, there could be tax benefits that could be availed. And I think some form of income transfer, whether through Narega or some of the other, even through the Krishi Kisan cards, if there is more credit and money which is available to the bottom of the pyramid, I think that would be very, very useful, because clearly urban consumption has done very well, but rural consumption is clearly flagging. And I think, to some extent, stimulating consumption at the bottom end could actually help manufacturing, because as capacity utilization goes up, companies will then want to do more capex. So I think there are tools available to the finance minister, for putting more money in the hands of people at the bottom of the pyramid.
Hiren, one quick point with you. The real estate story, and we have seen so much play out during the Modi years. Affordable housing was a theme, but one gets the sense, if you take a look at some of the data and anecdotally, that affordable housing hasn't done so well because a certain kind of strata has suffered job and income loss in the last 12-18 months. Do you expect anything for affordable housing and an uptick in that particular segment of the sector?
So I think, housing has always been in focus in every budget, right? And I think every time to encourage more housing, there are more tax exemptions, etc., which are given. But as you rightly put the nail on the head, it's not about tax benefits or making it more affordable. It's about people having incomes to afford a house. And that can only happen through greater, employment generation. So I think one other area which, India keeps talking about, but we haven't really seen any specific measures there, is to enhance industries like tourism, right? Which are very, very employment intensive. And I think that's also one sector which has suffered very, very dramatically because of COVID. And I think if there is some targeted benefits that are given to service sectors like tourism, restaurants, small scale industry, I think that would go a long way in kind of boosting incomes.
Right.
And then indirectly their housing.
Right. Shankar Iyer, welcome to the show. It's going to be a long day for you as well. I want to begin by your opening comments, really. If we go beyond the budget a little bit, when it comes to the overall play of business, the last couple of years, especially post the COVID pandemic, have been years where big business has gotten bigger. Small business, which has received support, for instance, through measures like the emergency credit line scheme, is still struggling. What is the theme that you think will play out, and what will work for the Modi government from a political economy point of view?
Well, ideally, this is going to be a budget where messaging balance will have to be achieved. So you'll have the finance minister will try and message to the industrial and manufacturing sector and to the larger economy that they will keep the growth impulses going. And given the fact that there are elections in 5 different states and Uttar Pradesh being very critical, they will also have to message that they are being the bottom of the pyramid.
Are you making a distinction between messaging and concrete measures, Shankar?
Well, budgets are normally, Siddharth, largely about messaging, because at the end of the day, and Saurabh Garg is there, he will tell you that, the central government is at the most can issue sermons on Sunday, and the rest of the 6 days, it is the state governments which have to implement. And currently, state governments are sitting over between 4 and 5 lakh crores, which is unspent, which I think is completely unpardonable, but there it is. So I think the messaging, coming back to your question, the messaging will be about, so the government, in a way, it's a good place to be in, because private final consumption expenditure is still below 2019 levels. So how do you prop that up? So your title of your budget program is booster shot. And I think the one big issue that will come that the finance minister will have to speak about is how much of the country is vaccinated and what is the road ahead there to ensure that the contact.
Shankar, very quickly, isn't it time that the vaccination theme doesn't get overplayed? The productive parts of the economy, in a way, the urban areas, the factory workers, all have been double vaccinated. So how much more can we continue to push the vaccination theme and perhaps also realize more money through cesses on that account?
Well, next to Omi Bhai or his cousin, somebody might surface, a new variant might surface. So the government has to take a call on how they will ensure that contact economy gets going. So somebody spoke about tourism, hospitality, aviation, and a large part of the retail, the small businesses. They're all being hit because there is this constant fear of people are not coming out, and even if they are coming out, then there are government restrictions. So how the economy is going to open up?
Let me take that point very quickly. Let me take that point with Subhash Garg. Subhash Garg, explain to our viewers the reluctance, and I use that word consciously, to intervene for those who are immediately impacted. In the current wave, we have seen, whichever way you describe it, restaurants, hotels, tourism take the brunt of the third wave. It's a wave that has perhaps receded, and that's good. Why is there this reluctance to provide immediate support? It's good that you have long-term targets, investment, infrastructure, capacity building, but why not some immediate relief?
See, in my judgment, there are 2 reasons. One, the most impacted segments in this contact-intensive services or the trade businesses, hospitality sector are the small businesses. In fact, single account, on-account kind of businesses where people work for themselves or with very small number of labor. Unfortunately, in India, we don't know them. We don't have any databases. We don't register them. We have excellent unique ID for individuals, 130 crores, but we have 8 crores of such businesses, but we don't know them. We don't register them. So it's our inability to reach out to them. That's one. The other one is I think the reluctance of the government to sort of dispense what was considered as kind of direct demand support or the direct cash or support to them.
Right.
The government has been reluctant to do it. It has gone through the guarantee route to give to the MSMEs, which are bigger ones, not the smaller ones. So
Dr. Garg, please pause that thought, because we'll have to come back and pick up this theme.